We are back, MLS Aces Podcast. We're back with another episode. We're sticking to the New Year's resolution. We are doing 2 episodes a week, and with that, we have our traditional interview now. Ben Wright from SixOneFive Soccer. Congratulations on SixOneFive Soccer, by the way. It is a beautiful website. I'm not a Nashville guy, but it's very informative, and I'm an MLS nerd, so I appreciate any more MLS nerdum soccer out there. So congratulations on that, first and foremost.
Yeah, thank you. It's been really fun kind of just seeing the response to it so far. I think we maybe underestimated the Nashville market a little bit. And yeah, we've just kind of been blown away by how many people have been interested so far. So yeah, it's been really fun, and I think we have some fun stuff planned for this year. So we're really excited.
If you can maybe, I don't know, give a quick characterization of the Nashville soccer scene for those who aren't in the scene, right? I'm a New York City guy. My co-host for the podcast, Jason, he's in Chicago. What can you characterize Nashville soccer, the entire, from fan interest to, marketing to what would you characterize it as?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really good. Obviously, they built the biggest soccer stadium in North America or US and Canada. And they, until last year, they were regularly selling out. And I think you saw kind of a dip with just the team's performance. But I mean, getting 25, 30,000 people to show up for most games is, I don't think it's a small feat. So that's impressive. I think the soccer scene is pretty good. I think they're consistently towards the top of like the NBC's Premier League viewership rankings. So there's a ton of interest in soccer. And I think kind of the challenge, and it's not unique to Nashville, I think it's a challenge kind of around the country, is turning your general soccer fan into an MLS fan. So I think kind of that's the next step for them. But I mean, soccer is huge here in Nashville. There's a ton of like a huge pickup culture, men's league. I mean, obviously everywhere it's a huge youth sport. And so, yeah, I think it's growing quickly, but I think there's a huge base here. And I think there's a ton of room for it to get even bigger here in the next decade.
Well, for anyone listening or watching, go over to 615soccer.com because, Ben, the team that you have also working over there is unbelievable. Even, look, I'm a guy, I keep my own MLS depth charts. And when you guys put out that Jacob Schaffelberg no longer required, he no longer needs an international roster spot, and it was a green card and all of that. It's just a little thing like that just helps me out with my own preparation for whatever I'm talking about that week. So I appreciate it, and I think others should too. So again, 615soccer.com. But Ben, let's talk about Nashville SC because this is a club that I think is coming out of its 1.0, its first edition, whatever you want to talk about, with the end of the Gary Smith era. And now BJ Callaghan going to his first full season. You've had, I think some changes. I still think there's some question marks around what BJ Callaghan is as a manager for a club team for Nashville and what that's going to look like. So I want to start, I guess, with the top down in terms of BJ Callaghan. Yeah. You've had the opportunity to meet with them, talk with them, right? What does BJ Callaghan say he wants to implement in his soccer team, and kind of maybe building off a little bit with what we saw in half a season with him last year?
Yeah, sure. So obviously I think I'm coming into this with a little bit of proximity bias just because I'm around them every week, and I talk to BJ a good bit. But like kind of just putting on like a national analyst hat, I think he's one of the more detail-oriented coaches I've talked to in MLS. He has a very, very specific way that he wants to play, but I don't think it veers into the territory of forcing players to be robots. I think it honestly is that he wants to drill down what every option is in every scenario so players can kind of do it without thinking, and then that leads to kind of becoming so familiar with the system and where everybody else is that you can kind of improvise within that. So I think his idea is to make it so simple for them that it's easy to all kind of be on the same page, which I think every coach will say that that's what they're trying to do. So still TBD how it works. He wants to be much more of a high pressing team than Nashville ever were. I think under Gary Smith, kind of at their worst, they just invited pressure. It worked sometimes because it opened space the other way for Hany Mukhtar to counter, and I think that's where most of their success came from. But they just, when they didn't have the ball, they were not proactive in any way, and I think that's going to change a lot. I think they're going to be pretty aggressive without the ball. They're going to press a lot, and then I think they just had to get better with the ball. I mean, Hany Mukhtar has been calling for it for 3 years publicly, and I think that was one of the biggest issues under Gary Smith is they were just very, very predictable. It was a lot of kind of passing back and forth in midfield, hoping that something would open up on its own, and then just defaulting to lumping in crosses when they couldn't find anything. And so I think that's going to go away pretty quickly. So yeah, I think it's a much more modern approach. They'll actually play young players now, which is huge. I mean, and you kind of have to do it in this iteration of MLS. Like if you're not developing young players and ideally selling them on, then you're at a pretty big disadvantage. So yeah, I think it's just the easy way to describe it is just a much more modern approach to soccer. And I think it's probably going to help everybody, not just the first team, but Huntsville City and MLS Next Pro all the way down to the academy. I think it's going to be good for the whole club.
I mean, like, it makes sense, right? I think what Gary Smith and, again, whatever you want to call him, this first edition of Nashville SC, of their MLS era, I think they did a lot of good things. I think there was a lot of success, and I think the defense was obviously, I think you were talking like best defense in the league, I think every single season, right?
Yeah.
Arguably up there. So I think what they did was great, and maybe even a good level setter to build upon for MLS, for their MLS growth and their MLS history, right? And you talk about the more modern approach to what BJ Callaghan's trying to bring to Nashville and to Nashville SC. I think there are the players there to do that, right? To be a little bit more pressing without the ball. I look at Jacob Schaffelberg, someone I brought up before, right? I think he's a kid who exploded onto the scene last year in terms of what his abilities were. Maybe a little bit more with Canada than with Nashville, but I still think with Nashville just as well. You look at an Alex Wheel, Tyler Boyd, I think even a Sam Surridge could succeed in some type of pressing system like that. Is there someone that you think this shift in ideology or the shift in tactics, formation, whatever, we want to kind of go down there, that could really maybe jump off the scene and kind of make a name for himself in 2025?
Yeah, so there are two that kind of stand out. First is Walker Zimmerman, which is maybe not an obvious one, but I think even looking back to the LAFC days, they played a much more open and kind of high pressing system, and it just let him be more aggressive. I think he's at his best when he's able to kind of like step up into midfield and really challenge a striker before they get the ball and before they can turn. And I think he's just going to be asked to play a much higher line. I also think he's finally healthy. He had a couple, I would call them freak injuries last year, like a knee-to-knee collision that required surgery and kept him out for like a month. So I think most of that stuff, knock on wood, is behind him, and he's in a contract year. So I think he needs a big performance this season to either stay in Nashville or kind of earn a contract somewhere else. The other one, a new signing they brought in, Edvard Tagseth. He reminds me a lot of a young Dax McCarty. I think just stature-wise, he's 5'7", kind of an all-action midfielder. I think he's kind of capable of playing really anywhere as a 6, an 8, even maybe a 10, but he's been playing kind of on the right side of this 4-2-2-2. I don't know how many twos I said there. Whatever. You know what I mean. After like 2 twos, it gets hard to keep track. But he's been kind of playing not as a right winger, but kind of as a wider midfield on the right side. And I think he and Hany Mukhtar already have a pretty good connection established. And he's one that I think he's just kind of an all-action, full of energy type guy. And I think he's going to run for 90 minutes with or without the ball. So I think the pressing style really suits him. And he's one, I mean, they brought him in after Callaghan. So I think he is one that they kind of have identified as someone, not just a player that is already on the team that they can kind of work into things, but they've set him up as someone that they've like identified to be kind of one of the key pieces for the next 4 or 5 years. So I think he's going to have a huge season for them.
Okay, 2 names to keep an eye on. If Walker Zimmerman can take another level up in his MLS career pedigree resume, then I think that's even better for you guys, right? But I understand what you mean. I think the shift to maybe what he was used to at previous clubs, where again he still had a ton of success, is probably something BJ Callaghan's going to want to fall back on, right? I think BJ, a little familiar with Walker Zimmerman from previous stops as well too.
Well, I think it's a huge year for Walker too. I mean, he's one of 2, maybe 3 DP center backs in all of the league. And like, I think Nashville want to keep him around, but I don't think they want to keep him on a DP deal. So it's going to be a huge question for Nashville. Like, what happens in July if you're nowhere close to a new contract with Zimmerman? Do you look to trade him? Do you like try to convince him to take a max TAM deal? Does he just ride it out and go into free agency and see what he can find? So I think that's like one of the biggest question marks for them.
I'm going to, I think, break this down a little bit in terms of how I did it with Mark Fishkin on the Seeing Red podcast. And we kind of talked about the Red Bulls and a little bit of what positional group by positional group looks like. And to me, I think the starting center back duo, and I'm going to go back line first, but the starting center back duo for this team is Walker Zimmerman and Jack Mayer. Am I incorrect in that? Because I feel like Jack Mayer almost took a step back last year in expectations. I still think he's an unbelievable center back, but I feel like, I don't know, there was something that kind of held him back from taking that step forward that I feel like many people expected from him.
Yeah, I think that's kind of been his thing for the past couple of years. Like, I think everybody sees he has a pretty high ceiling, and I don't think he's really lived up to that yet. Like he'll have a couple weeks in a row where he looks like one of the best players on the field, and then something just changes. I don't know if it's a confidence issue or what, but I know he, like, just being around the team in preseason, he is noticeably more vocal this year. Like he was pretty quiet on the field last year, and now he's one of the louder guys on the field. He's pretty clearly like taken on a more of a leadership role. So I think he'll go into the season as the starting center back. They're pretty high on Josh Bauer, who they just re-signed to a long-term deal. I think he's probably going to play a little bit more at right back to start the year, just while Julian Gaines gets healthy. The kind of wild card is Jason Palacios, who I don't think a ton of people in MLS have really heard of before they signed him, but he has 250 caps in the Colombian League. He's 30 years old, kind of in his prime, and I don't think Nashville's the type of team that would use an international slot on a guy who they thought had no chance of winning a starting spot. So he had a long off season and kind of came into camp a little bit late. So he hasn't been 100% match fit yet, but I wouldn't be surprised as kind of 4 or 5 weeks into the season, as he's getting more fit, if we see him start to kind of push Mayer for that starting spot. I think he probably has the potential to be Zimmerman's partner this year.
Palacios was going to be someone I was going to ask you about, because I think, right, like when you get these experienced guys from South America, I feel like sometimes it's a question mark, right? Like I felt the same way about like a Danny Rosero when he went to Sporting Kansas City a few years ago.
Totally, yeah.
Could be an absolute stud of a signing. Could be a guy that we see for half a season and goes back to South America and we never hear from again. It's just right. The nature of Major League Soccer. But one of the other kind of players on this back line that led me to some questions when the signing happened was Andy Nahar. Not in any type of negative way, but was more of, could there be some type of tactical shift to a back three? We've seen Andy Nahar succeed as a right center back in Major League Soccer. You can totally shoot me down if that's absolutely no thought here, but I don't know. Is there any type of tactical potential, maybe play BJ Callaghan could be having fun with Andy Nahar at?
I don't know. Yeah, I think maybe the back three stuff that we saw him in was pretty specific to DC because just of how insane their pressing system was. And I think it worked for him. I mean, BJ used a back three a couple of times last year, so I don't think it's out of the question. But in preseason, he's been pretty much playing as a right back. And I think I mentioned Tagseth, who's more of a central midfielder. He'll pinch in a lot, and so Nahar is kind of the one who provides all the width. And he's been one of the standouts so far in preseason. I think Nashville wanted to get more attacking production out of Shaq Moore and never did. And so I think they just made the switch to Nahar, who should be able to give you at least the same level of attacking production, if not more, for just a lot less. But they're also super high on Julian Gaines. I think he's probably going to take – I wouldn't be surprised if they end up splitting minutes 50-50 at right back. Gaines is currently working through a little bit of an injury issue, so I don't think he'll be fully fit for the start of the season, but I think they're really high on him, and I expect him to play a ton this year too.
Okay. I mean, look, I like hearing that for Julian Gaines. Also like hearing that wherever Andy Nahar go, people love him. Like, and the coach love him. He's just that kind of guy. And
he's a great guy. It's been fun getting to talk to him a few times already.
I love it. And we've mentioned Wright Tagseth a little bit. This has been a new look central midfield or I guess even Tagseth, you're saying, playing out wide a little bit too. Whatever. The central midfield, I think, is going to be a completely new look, a new shift for this team. You have veterans like Gaston Brugman just winning MLS Cup MVP. You also have a lot of younger talent, right? Patrick Yazbek was brought in last summer. Even Matthew Corcoran, yeah. Appreciate it. He's coming from a USL standout to where we are now with Nashville. What do you expect, I guess maybe minutes wise, who do you expect to potentially be locking down the central midfield? I'd expect Yazbek, but let me know what the thoughts are.
Yeah, I think if everybody's healthy, it's going to be Brugman and Yazbek in midfield. It's crazy. Yazbek has played the most games of any Nashville SC midfielder, and he arrived in July, which is just why. So you're right. It's like a completely different group. So I think Yazbek is going to be kind of a Wright and Penn starter. He looks really, really good. Brugman, when healthy, is going to be a starter, but that's kind of the big question, right? I don't think he's played more than 1,900 minutes in his 3 years in MLS. So, and he's currently injured. So that's the big issue with him. He's on a 1-year contract, so I don't think it's like Nashville are necessarily looking for him to be the future. But ideally, you get a decent chunk of minutes out of him, and I think everybody who's watched MLS just knows kind of what he can do with the ball, and I think he's probably pretty key to how Nashville want to play this year. If he doesn't play, it's Brian Acosta in that number 6 role, who it is what it is. Like, I don't think he's the most inspiring player, but he's not a DP. And I think that he was a fine midfielder if he wasn't occupying a DP spot. And I think that's the big issue with him in Dallas, especially, was that he just didn't offer any return on that on value for that DP spot. But if you can get him for like $500K, I think he's fine. And he's looked fine in midfield. Corcoran, I'm really excited about. I mean, he plays a ton for the USU 20s, another Dallas product, but he signed with Birmingham as a 15-year-old, and he's 18 now and already has over 50 like senior appearances at a professional level, which is like any 18-year-old who has 50 professional appearances like in any league is pretty impressive. So I think he's one of those Dallas guys who maybe snuck under the radar a little bit, but I think if it's not this year, I think within a year or two, he's probably going to be pushing for starting minutes in Nashville. BJ Callaghan, super high on him. And just from what I've seen, he already looks like one of the better passers they have.
Corcoran's a kid who I watched him a ton with Birmingham over the last few years. He's a kid that plays so much above his age. It's incredible. And I think, Nashville, I can see him being a starter in 2026. And I don't know if he's around that much longer after 2026.
Right. Yeah. I think he's probably already, I mean, they have 3 homegrown players signed. And I think Corcoran, if you kind of classify him with those kind of young players, he already has the most kind of European potential, I think, of any kind of young Nashville player. So he's one that I think is going to be really fun to watch.
I'm going to sidetrack us really quick. The homegrown station with Nashville. It's not it's not that I don't think the Nashville area has this, hotbed of talent, but we haven't seen a ton of homegrown signings come from the Nashville organization. I think, right, like Adam Sepich was the first homegrown signing, if I'm not mistaken, right? He's still on the team, and I think he's growing into his own. I like what I see from him, but what do you make of, I guess, maybe the homegrown ideology right now with Nashville and where it stands on the current senior team roster? Yeah,
so I mean, I think it took longer than other teams. I think you've seen other expansion teams come in and start their academy before the actual team started, and Nashville didn't. They waited until 2020 to really get the academy up and running. So when you're starting with U13s, it just takes players have to get old enough to sign deals. I think the other part of the issue, I mean, I feel like we've kind of ragged on Gary Smith a lot already, and I don't want to do that, but one of his shortcomings was just not wanting to play young players. So I think you were never really going to see homegrown players come in and play real minutes with Gary, or even go into a season maybe feeling like they had a shot at playing real minutes. And like, I don't know if Adam Sepich or Isaiah Jones are going to feature a ton for Nashville. I'd probably be pretty surprised if they play more than a handful of games, but I think they went into preseason this year thinking they could win minutes for Nashville, which is kind of the first time that's happened. Chris Applewhite, they just signed. He's the most recent homegrown signing. He was actually in DC United's territory, and Nashville got him and brought him into their academy a couple years ago. So I think maybe that's an example of kind of like what they can do. I think there is probably talent here in the Nashville area, but I think it's not nearly at the level as you'll see in kind of some of the hotbed areas of the country. So I think you have to get a little creative. But like Applewhite's the 5th center back on the depth chart right now. Like they will, if they need him, they will give him minutes. And I don't think you could say that about probably either of the other 2 guys. So I want to be surprised if Applewhite plays a couple games before the year's over. And I think he has, like, I don't want to say like Mark McKenzie level of potential, but that's a comparison I've heard from a lot of people who watch the youth teams and know what they're talking about. So I think he's maybe a different level of prospect than you've seen from Nashville before. And I think he's probably a guy who could be a long-term starter for them a couple years down the road.
I hand up am not someone that sits here and watches MLS Next Pro matches.
What?
It's crazy, right? Crazy.
No, yeah.
Once the playoffs come on, I get invested and I watch and all of that.
To be fair, I don't think I even did that. So
I didn't catch every playoff game, but I like to see. I think I like to see some of the bigger names in action when possible, right? And right with Kevin Sullivan last year and everything like that, I wanted to see what he was doing for Union too. But Chris Applewhite was someone that I've seen play in a few Huntsville matches, and he is another kid that I feel like plays up his age a little bit, right? Like young center backs, I think are always a question mark, always a concern. It's something, and it's Matt Doyle says it. It's a reason why you don't see a lot of young center backs playing even throughout European soccer or anything like that.
Yeah,
I think he though has a profile that I liked in the little bit that I watched him. So I can't say I'm an expert, a pro, or anything like that, but I have high hopes for Applewhite. I like him a lot. I like his game a lot.
Sure.
I want to bump up into the attack a little bit now because there are some question marks, and I think there's a lot of potential here for this attack to be a ton of fun. What does, if we're talking the 4-2-2-2-2-2-2-2, what does those...
I think you left out some twos there.
Sorry. Again, you lose track when you count it. What is that, I guess, maybe attacking four look like? Is it, Hany, I think, is obviously in the middle of it, but is it Hany, Schaffelberg, Surridge, and Tyler Boyd if he's fully back healthy? Is it Alex Mweel? Is it this new U22 initiative? I'm going to probably butcher his name, but Ahmed Qasem. Is it any combination of that? What does your ideal maybe attacking four look like for this team?
Yeah, so I think it's going to be Hany and Sam in the middle. Hany and Sam Surridge. And I think, that makes sense. They're the two DPs. I think Surridge, a lot of people around the league don't seem to rate him super highly. I think he was really good last year. He scored 12 goals. And if you look at the service he got, just as kind of Nashville, fired Gary Smith, had an interim manager for a few months. Like, he was doing a lot with not much help. So I think if you give him a decent amount of chances, he'll score. And I have him scoring like in the 17 goal range this year. So I think he's going to be a pretty solid striker. I think those two, if they're healthy, they kind of pick themselves. I think it's the wings where things get tricky. Not tricky, but I think they have options, which is kind of the first time that's happened in a while. So I think right now it's Tagseth on the right and Mweel on the left.
Okay.
Mweel was really, really, really good under Callaghan. I think he scored like 4 goals in the 11 games that Callaghan was the coach. So I think he could. It's weird to say maybe be a breakout player because he's 29, but I think I wouldn't be surprised if he kind of has a career best season just attacking wise. Tyler Boyd, when he gets back, I think he hopefully will be ready to start games in kind of early to mid June. I think that's maybe the best timeline. But he's a starting quality winger, and I think someone that you never got. Another guy that Callahan's pretty familiar with, but didn't get. He got hurt, I think, either 1 or 2 games before Callaghan took over, which kind of just sucked for him. It was a freak injury and just really bad luck. So I'm excited to see what he looks like.
For his injury, like he was playing some really good soccer. I think maybe some of his best since he got to MLS right before his injury too.
He was like one of the few Nashville attackers who didn't drop off last year.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, it was really unfortunate for him, but I think he's honestly going to be like a new signing for them when he gets healthy. And then on the right, Tagseth, I think, is the starter. Schaffelberg's been playing more as almost in the same spot that Hany's been playing as one of those two more central strikers. So interested to see what happens with him long term. And then Ahmed Qasem, who they just signed. He's kind of played on the right or the left as a number 10, sometimes even as a more like a deeper midfield, I think more out of necessity, but he can really play anywhere kind of along the front four.
Yeah.
So, and they reportedly spent like $4.5 million on him. Which would make him, I think, their 3rd most expensive transfer. So, like, I think obviously he has development potential, but I also don't think he was brought in just to develop. Like, I think they want him to play real minutes and contribute. So, I want to see what happens when he's kind of fully integrated and ready to go, because I think they have options on the wings that they haven't really before, and I think Callahan's going to have to get pretty creative.
I've mentioned that I have my own depth charts, right? And I think one of the things with the Qasem, I'll get it down. Qasem signing, the official announcement, just for everyone knowing, right? Today, the 18th, the day we're recording this, is really like I want to plug him as a starter, right? Because like the profile makes sense to other very good players we've seen come into Major League Soccer. It's the Allsvenskan, right? Elfsborg has developed talent. We've seen it come across, and we've seen it be successful. But yeah, maybe it's just right. Like he's not fully acclimated yet at this point, but he's a kid that I feel like is going to work himself into a starting spot by the end of the season. And if that's the case, then I think Nashville's probably very successful in 2025. I don't know how much you've been hearing or obviously talking around the club around Qasem, but what is the I guess the hype around him right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're really, really high on him. I think they have a lot of guys who work really, really hard on the wings, but I don't know if they have a bunch of guys who are like goal scorers on the wings. And I think that's probably where he's different. Just from kind of watching the tape, he's unreal with a ball at his feet. He's probably the best dribbler they have on the team. And I think even Matt Doyle in some of his previews, he's talked about one of the big weaknesses he sees as just not having guys who can break teams down on the dribble from the wings, maybe besides Johnny Perez. And so I think just getting someone like that just gives them a completely different look than they would have otherwise. I think he's probably going to gel. He looks like a guy who should have really good chemistry with Hany. I think the two of them around the box should be pretty fun to watch. And the other thing too is like Tagseth, we already talked about, he can play as a 6. So I think it could be the type of thing that eventually he shifts into a more central role, which is probably his more natural position. And then you get him, Yazbek, and Qasem all starting in the same team. And I think that's a pretty scary team.
I think that if that is probably best case scenario for what this, Mike Jacobs and this Nashville front office probably wishes and hopes for. And I'll leave the last. We didn't really touch the two up top and Surgeon. Well, we touched Sam Surge a lot, but Hany Mukhtar, right? Do you think this is him finally just taking like a deep breath? He obviously loves the city, loves the club. I think he got married within the stadium, right?
Yep, it's on his birthday too, which is wild.
That's even better. Okay, makes the story even better. I didn't know the birthday part. But Hany is a guy who I think has carried this organization on his back since their beginning, or since his beginning with the club, right?
Yep.
And I can only hope that this is just a little bit of a rebirth for him in 2025. Does it seem like he's, back into it a little bit more? Obviously, you called out upon that he's been a little public with some of his comments about maybe some of the tactics of the past or whatnot. But do you think that this is an opportunity for him to, get his name back out there as one of the better players in the league once again?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think I talked about how good Wheel looked under Callaghan. I think Hany, it maybe took him a little bit longer, but I think he had like 3 goals and 3 assists in the last 8 games or something like that. So I think he's another guy who kind of picked up towards the end. I mean, there was all the reports of like the interest from Qatar a couple years ago. His form kind of dipped around then. He had some personal stuff going on too, which I think made it. I think there were a lot of reasons that make sense why his form dipped. I think he should be back pretty, maybe not to MVP level, but I think he should be closer to the Hany that we saw for the first 4 years than what we saw last year.
All right. Final question for you. Nashville SC. I think I saw you put your predictions out, so I hope it's okay that I'm asking. But
go for it.
Where do you best case scenario have them, worst case scenario have them, and then where's like, that realistic probably middle ground of where you see them?
I think I probably would have them. I mean, it's a big range, but I would say like 5 to 12. I think best case they could push. Like, I don't think they're a top 4 team, but I think if everybody plays out of their mind, if they stay injury free and all these new signings hit pretty quickly, I think they could maybe, I would say, be kind of like what Charlotte was last year. And I don't think that's unrealistic because 2 years ago when Mukhtar was playing kind of towards his peak and Walker Zimmerman was healthy, it was really a similar team that were kind of in that range. They were like always kind of around the 5 to 6 range. So I think they could be that. I think worst case they're what they were last year. But I think they'll probably be. I have them right now finishing 8th, and I think they'll probably finish kind of not firmly in the playoffs, but kind of around the cusp. And I think it's really just 2025 feels like kind of a building year. They have another, I think, 11 guys out of contract at the end of this year. So I don't think you're going to see kind of the full version or kind of the finalized version of what BJ Callaghan wants to do for at least another year. But if they can improve from last year, I think that's kind of a win for everybody.
I was gonna say, by the time people hear this, our Eastern Conference predictions will be out. So I have Nashville just outside the playoffs, but
Yeah.
like that I think first or second team just out. I agree with you completely. This feels like 2025. Let's get a lot of these younger guys, like, acclimated to the team, the league, whatever it may be. And then 2026, hopefully they're all taking that step forward and we'll be a really good team by then. Obviously, working out Walker Zimmerman and stuff like that, I would think the team probably wants to keep him around being a key part of it. But I think Nashville is in a really good new spot, really good new era, and a lot of questions will be answered in 2025. And the best place to get those answers as they come across is 651 Soccer. Ben, thank you so much for coming on, talking with me about Nashville, and hopefully we can chat again this season.
Yeah, thanks. This was a ton of fun. Thanks for having me, and yeah, let's definitely do it again.